Welcome, welcome. I see the room is starting to fill up. So glad to have so many of you here with us tonight for a very special conversation with Oregon AFL-CIO President GrahamTrainor. We'll give it a minute. We've got a lot of folks filing into the room. My name is Mark Brenner. I work at the Labor Education Research Center at the University of Oregon, and I'm very happy to be here with Graham tonight for a conversation about the state of Oregon unions. This webinar is part of a summer series that we're doing on a lot of the key topics facing the labor movement. I hope many of you will be able to attend our other events that we've still got lots of good ones lined up for the remainder of the summer. So please keep coming back. We'll put the link to register in the chat. Let's let everybody else just file in, see how we're doing. We're still having people join us. So we'll get started in a minute or two. Again, welcome to the Labor Education Research Center AFL-CIO Summer Series. Very happy to have you with us and to have GrahamTrainor, Oregon AFL-CIO President, here for such an important conversation. We'll probably just get started in another minute or two. The room is still filling up. So thanks for being here. Just a few housekeeping for folks who have been to one of our webinars before. We're going to be doing, the way that this is going to work tonight is I'm going to open up, introduce Graham. Graham will give us a few remarks. And then we're going to be trying to get as many questions and get a conversation started with everybody who's here tonight. So we definitely want to make sure and have if you are interested in asking questions, to use the chat box to ask your question if you'd like, or you can raise your hand if you're on your computer. I'm sure many of you have done this now. Hit the participants button and then the raise hand button, and that's how you can get your question, get recognized to speak, and we'll let you ask Graham questions that you have. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right. We try to be punctual. We're trying to take your 1 hour very seriously, that you're here for our session. So we're going to go ahead and get going. I know people are joining us. I wanted to just shout out. I see in the room we've got paper workers, we've got OSEA members, we've got SEIU 503, and folks from the Oregon Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals, from the Oregon nurses, from the machinists. We've got carpenters, we've got electricians, we've got Graham's very onion, IBW 48 in the house, and teachers. We've got really, I see some IATSE Local 154 folks on the call. Very happy to have you here. Folks from Oregon AFT. So it's really great cross-section of folks from across the state. As I said before, tonight we're here to have a conversation with GrahamTrainor, President of Oregon AFL-CIO. And Graham, I got to tell you, if we roll the clock back to September when you were elected president of the AFL and you're being sworn in, I'm sure you had nothing like this in mind for your first year in office. But you know, toughest times are what make the best leaders. So I'm very anxious to hear your take on the state of Oregon unions and where we're going as a movement. So let me give you the floor and let's get going.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate that. I think what you just shared about everyone's experience at Seaside was an understatement, I would say, to say the least. But nonetheless, I think I'm really proud of Oregon's labor leaders and the movement for the work that's being done right now, and I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. So just going to say a few opening remarks. Good evening, my Oregon and Pacific Northwest labor family. There is only one place that I would rather be on a Wednesday evening with a smart, committed group of labor and progressive learners, doers, and fighters, because I'd rather be with you in a union hall in person. But thanks to LERC and their team for taking the lead on putting this series together, and for all that they do to support the Oregon union movement. Their role and work are treasures to our movement, and we will always have their back as they tackle new and old challenges alike. Now, like many of you, I've found myself feeling that Zoom fatigue these days. So I appreciate you joining this evening and for your constant efforts to stay connected with our movement and with each other, despite the distance and the challenges. Now, our movement is no stranger to crisis. We've been kicked while we're down, written off. Our eulogy has been written multiple times, most recently a couple years ago with the Janus case. And yet our movement continues to showcase resilience and embody stick-to-itiveness, because that's what we do. The working class depends on us to be the bulwark against unchecked crony capitalism and greed. And it doesn't take much to find some really recent current examples of this unabashed greed on display at this very moment, aiming to take advantage of the crisis to advance the ALEC playbook bought and paid for by corporate America. It's rough out there for workers, for defenders of workers, for all of us. At the same time, this crisis moment to me feels a bit different, like it may for you as well. Working people are in fact facing three crises all at the same time: a global pandemic, an economic freefall, and long-standing systemic and institutional racism. This is a really heavy, dangerous time, especially for the essential workers who are risking their lives as they go to work and interact with the public, or the nearly 50 million Americans who've not only lost their job and likely their health care, but now have just lost the additional $600 unemployment weekly benefit because the callousness and inaction of Senate Republicans in Congress. And for workers of color and women who have been historically left behind by our rigged economic system, this pandemic is making those disproportionate impacts even more severe and troubling, with Black Americans dying at 2.5 times the rate of white people. Because of how all-encompassing this moment and these current struggles feel, it's often hard not to lose sight of the larger context and the system that we're operating within. Earlier this year, we were just recently gathering in person, talking about the rise in collective action being felt from coast to coast, seeing Oregon unions win game-changing contracts through bold shop floor action, and preparing for an exciting primary election season aimed at holding the elected officials accountable who betrayed working families during the 2019 session by ramrodding through PERS reform and failing to act on other key worker-led policy priorities. Our movement was in full motion with new worker organizing, inspiring contract campaigns, and an ambitious primary political agenda. Now, that's not to say that our economic system was working for us then by any means. Just a stark reminder of where we were just a few short months ago. And then in early March, everything changed for all of us. Some industries shuttered almost overnight. The economy went into free fall. Workers deemed essential and still having to show up for on-site work were all of a sudden being exposed to a deadly virus. Our unemployment system was completely overwhelmed almost instantly, leaving hundreds of thousands of Oregonians without a job and without an unemployment check. And for many, that same reality, that impossible reality, has lasted throughout the pandemic. And then on May 25th, America witnessed again the callous murder of a Black person when George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer whose knee gruesomely remained on Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds until he died. This horrific act, coupled with the recent murders of Breonna Taylor, I might add, whose murderers are still free, Ahmaud Arbery, among so many others, this set our nation on fire, demanding real change in policing practices and an end to the killings of Black women and men at the hands of law enforcement. Making statements and calling for change, frankly, just isn't enough anymore. As a movement, we must look hard at our organizations, our institutions, and do the harder internal work of dismantling racism and white supremacy within. Now, this won't be easy. There's no question that we have and will continue to alienate some by prioritizing this work. But there is no question in my mind what side of history our movement needs to be on. And there's also no question that this may be one of the most difficult times in any of our lives, given its historic nature. But at the same time, I've got a lot of hope for how our movement is responding and will continue to help lead in the defense of the working class in the months and the years ahead. Oregon unions have been on the front lines fighting for policy and workplace changes that don't just help protect union members, but all workers. It's what we do, and it's especially on display now. Centering working people, especially essential workers, right now in the media and our lawmaking in our communities is exactly what we need more of. And I'm really excited about the conversation, both with you, Mark, and the audience. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come together in this unique setting and carry on that important conversation about the state of the movement and where we're headed.
Well, thank you, Graham. You covered a lot of big picture issues. I wanted to go to the very first one you brought up, which is the pandemic itself. I know everybody has their own experience of the shelter in place. And for those folks who are on the call or who aren't, who were essential workers, you know, that experience was very different from many of us that were working remotely. I wanted to just see if you could share some of kind of how this impacted our unions around the state. You know, the AFL-CIO is really the hub of the labor movement here, and you're really in touch with everything happening. So for folks who don't necessarily have as big a picture as you do, I mean, like how did this crisis hit our unions? You know, what's been the impact?
That is a big question. And, you know, it really depends on the sector that we're talking about. But I'll just say, broadly speaking, to your point about telework, you know, there are direct correlations with high wage workers and access to flexible work schedules like telework, and lower wage workers that have been deemed essential and have ultimately been showing up every day. So I think that is one of the many sort of impacts that's really driving what we talk a lot about around disproportionate impacts and who really is bearing the brunt of the pandemic, both in contraction rates, exposure, vulnerability, that kind of thing. You know, I think there's folks on the line that I see that could speak really powerfully about their firsthand experiences of helping workers, their members, or even themselves in many cases deal with what's happening, especially for essential workers. So again, I won't want to preach to the choir, but I'll just say broadly that you know, we had some, like I said in my opening statements, you know, there are some industries that literally have been decimated, and some of the folks on the line could speak firsthand to that, I know. You know, so on one hand, you have complete decimation in the industries that were shut down on day one, and in other places of high demand, healthcare, grocery, retail, there have actually been growth in employment, and everything in between. And so, you know, I think to talk a little bit more specifically about the stay-at-home, stay-safe order from late March, you know, that order was structured a little differently than other states had structured their stay-home, stay-safe orders, which ultimately had the impact that more workers were actually deemed essential because of the silence, just literally the deemed silent, you know, silence in the order of a specific industry automatically meant that those workers were allowed to continue to show up, and those employers were able to continue to run their businesses. And so, you know, that's posed all kinds of challenges as it relates to the diversity of the impacts, the industries that have been impacted, and frankly, our advocacy about how to protect those most vulnerable and how to prioritize that work, really. So I'm looking forward to more conversations tonight about the specific work that we're doing to really protect all workers. But it really is it's a mixed bag. But it's absolutely catastrophic for just about everybody, because even if you're an essential worker and you're a union that represents grocery and retail, and your membership or employment in your industry is growing, your workers, up until, you know, it took a month to get the stinking shields at grocery stores that we all now take for granted. So I think that and adequate PPE, of course, is just a constant theme across industries, not just in healthcare, that has truly been problematic and led to more exposure, unfortunately more contraction, and ultimately more death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to definitely encourage folks, if you have questions for Graham, please drop them in the chat. Or raise your hand. If you are on your phone, you can hit the *9 button to raise your hand, or if you're on your computer, hit the participants button and then raise hands. I know that, just to speak to some of the extremes you were talking about, like when they canceled the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, for example, all the members of IATSE Local 154 are all of a sudden, poof, what is our summer looking like? We definitely have seen that with substitute teachers, and you know what's going to happen with schools as they reopen in the fall. So, you know, as you say, it's really highly variable. Tell me a little bit about what the union, what the AFL and the union movement in the state's been doing to try and, as you said, get protective equipment, make sure people are safe on the job. I know this is something you guys have been very active on. So just give us a picture.
Sure, I'll give a brief overview, but I have to mention, so I'm in my office. I actually come in the office a couple days a week. You know, it's a place I can be pretty efficient, but I'm not here very often. Our team is working remote, like many union staff are as well. But I'm literally, I'll look over at my whiteboard that you can't see, and the sketch of the earliest conversations around worker advocacy in the early days of COVID from the first week of March is literally on my whiteboard still. Didn't clean it off, didn't need to. But you know, that those early days, really, I think we were all as worker advocates, really, you know, really wrestling with what it meant to, you know, for the labor movement to come together around a common set of demands. And you know, I'm proud that our team, but also with many partners, many of, you know, some of the organizations, of course, that we partnered with are on the line today, really doubled down early on and really set out what those demands from working people should be. And that included rent eviction, you know, moratorium. So what ultimately became an executive order by the governor and now codified by the legislature. It included state OSHA infectious disease standard that we'll talk a little bit about in a bit, that is now underway, and we've actually got some traction. It included guaranteed access for workers' compensation protections when workers on the job that are deemed essential are exposed to the virus. It included, you know, guaranteed paid time off for a quarantine period. When we, as a state, I'm really proud of the Fair Shot Coalition and Family Forward Oregon and the great partners, both in labor and with our community organizational partners that really threw down in 2015 to pass a really important paid sick days policy. But at the time, we never contemplated a 14-day quarantine period. And so that gap in access to paid leave really, you know, was something we saw firsthand as a real concern for all kinds of reasons. But wanted to make sure that was in our advocacy. You know, I think figuring out, you know, as we move along, of course, we're going to have to, as a federation of a lot of unions that incorporate public and private sector unions, we're obviously going to have to support our public sector affiliates as they engage in these current budget fights that are gearing up right now as we speak, and really double down against this austerity narrative and really pushing back on that BS line and really shifting the focus like we do well around closing corporate tax loopholes and new revenue. So I think you know, that again is now an impact, an economic impact, but in the early days it was really about basic protections, and unfortunately we haven't gotten as much traction as working people should get and should expect out of the Oregon legislature and out of the governor. Now, that's not to say that we haven't been able to make great progress, and that's not to say that we haven't had constant contact, you know, with legislative leadership and the governor's office. But it's been a little disappointing, to be honest. As much as we like to talk about ourselves as a pro-union true blue state, you know, unfortunately, we've been a little disappointed. It's been a little frustrating to be 5 months into a pandemic and we still haven't fixed the workers' compensation issue. To be 5 months into a pandemic and we still don't have a statewide standard for infectious diseases in the workplace, right? So again, I'll try to be a diplomat this evening with my frustration, but I did want to just share some of those, both the specific asks and like some of the progress report.
Right, I know. Definitely, the budget projection that you just mentioned is, you know, red ink as far as the eye can see this biennium and into the next, and even beyond that. I see a question in the chat from Stella Bamrose that the governor made sure that public classified employees are made whole as far as their wages, and really trying to keep people economically secure and hold working class people harmless from this pandemic. But nothing looks like it looks like not much is on the agenda for the fall. So what is the AFL doing? What can we do to try and push our legislature to be bolder, to not advocate for austerity as you're talking about? What's our strategy?
I don't know if I can speak monolithically about the labor movement strategy on that really important question that I know a lot of folks on the line could probably answer really well too. But I'll just say, generally speaking, you know, we as a movement, I think, have done a pretty effective job at shifting. This is nationally, I believe. We've shifted the narrative, at least in pro-worker majority states. We've shifted the narrative to to sort of be less about going back to the old normal and knowing that we need to reimagine what a new normal really looks like, because the old normal frankly wasn't working for so many folks, and it was having dramatic disproportionate impacts that all kinds of indicators, wage gaps, for Black and brown workers, and the list goes on, all kinds of disproportionate impacts were really spotlighting what was wrong with the previous system, and now there's just been a spotlight shown on how bad those disproportionate impacts really are. And so I think that's some progress. I would say we've actually made some headway in hearing the governor talk about a new normal being different than the old normal, hearing legislative leadership. The proof will be in the pudding and how policies come together, but there's no question that austerity needs to have a full-throated opposition campaign against. And again, despite the challenges, right? There's no question that our economy has been dramatically impacted, and we're far from being out of the woods.
Right, and it's very nerve-wracking. I can say I've talked to a lot of unions around the state throughout the crisis about, especially in the public sector, about what to do. And my advice, as people were going into impact bargaining, facing furloughs and some more severe concessions, I kept saying, look, Congress is going to have to act if they don't want us to be in a Great Depression. So don't accept concessions at the height of uncertainty and absolute weakest point of leverage. Hold out. And then here we are in August, and we still haven't seen the relief that is so desperately needed for our workforce, for union workers everywhere. So I think we definitely learned from 2008 that a big crisis isn't enough to force the kinds of changes that are going to put working people where they need to be, at the center of our politics, at the center of our budgets. I'm going to move to the questions. I know I just wanted to let you know, Jordana, I saw your question in the chat. We're going to get to it in a second, but I did have a few people that had their hands up. I'm going to go to that list first. So Bruce Fife, you are on. Please ask your question, Bruce. Introduce yourself too.
I didn't ask a question.
No, you had your hand up.
No, if I did,
okay.
I'm sorry. I must have hit that
problem, Bruce. Glad to have you.
Hit it by mistake.
It's quite all right. It happens all the time. You're good. All right, we will move on to the next person with their hand up. Eric Feely, you're on. Please, brother. Let me unmute you. Eric, you might need to unmute yourself. No, there you go. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Eric Feely here, AFSCME Local 3336, Department of Environmental Quality, State Workers. Appreciate your comments, Graham. I'm not sure if I have a straightforward question. I guess I just wanted to express a little bit of frustration, I would say, with our movement in general around this particular crisis. You use words in your opening remarks like resilience and stick-to-itiveness, and while I appreciate those kinds of things, I think I'm looking for leadership to be more about like visionary and inspirational and leading, not following. And I guess I'm looking for a little bit more of an aggressive position from our movement in general. And I would like to encourage you and the staff at the AFL to take more aggressive positions on things in general. But I feel like this is a time whereby the other side of the people in our society are saying, oh, this is an opportunity, for cuts, right? And we're seeing at the state level, the Republicans, of course, always want cuts. The Democrats are now in line with making cuts and are happy to do it, it seems like. And so I guess I'm looking with uniformity there, I'm looking for leadership that's, pushing aggressively to counterbalance that at the state level, at the national level. And I feel like unions used to be the places where people could go for that kind of inspiration. And while, unions still do good work and we're focusing on issues like masks and we're kind of in the weeds on things, that's important stuff. And getting, days off for people that are sick, all important. But I was kind of hoping for more higher level thinking and more visionary kind of messaging coming out of our movement. And I guess I would just encourage you all to be thinking that way. And as to Mark's point about the austerity. I'm very much against that, and I think we need to be talking about the examples like 2008 where it just didn't work. It's not what got folks out of that situation. Austerity just doesn't do it. And same thing at the state level. And so I guess I would just encourage you all to be as aggressive as possible. This is me, a rank and file member, as well as a local president, trying to encourage our leadership, aka you, to do as much as you can and say, I feel like we need to be doing more and doing things more aggressively. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I appreciate that, Eric. I really do, and I wish I could. I wish I could, in a format like this, I could articulate or share some of that really good line holding, hard-nosed negotiating work that's been done. It often just happens, unfortunately, behind the scenes as it relates to protecting workers. But I think your point is really well taken. And I think leaders, especially leaders that are dealing with direct member impacts, are in an incredible, are facing just an impossible challenge. And that's not by any means to make excuses, brother. I think it is hard at times to sort of see the bigger picture when you're dealing with fires all day. And I think your point's well taken here at the State Federation, especially where we, I think, have a role that's a little unique. So I look forward to trying to showcase that more, and would like feedback along the way, brother.
Thanks, Graham. And thank you, Eric, for your question. We have a related question in the chat that I thought I would thread in here from Sarah Whalen. Sarah, thank you for your question. Graham, one of the really tough places you are as a leader is that you both have the bully pulpit as the head of our state labor movement, but you also have to be kind of the organizer in chief to hold the very diverse set of unions in the AFL-CIO together and try to come up with a united program that we can move forward with in lockstep. So the question Sarah asked, it both speaks to the challenges of your job in terms of being bold and really leading. But Sarah asked the flip side of it, which was, it looks like we're headed into another major and very long budget shortfall. How do you see labor unions working well together to stay united instead of fighting a dozen fights on a dozen different fronts? And I'll add to Sarah's question, fighting with each other, because we certainly have seen plenty of times where sometimes people, instead of sticking together, it's sort of, how can we make sure that we're the last person on the life raft?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of embodies, I think, one of the biggest challenges of Federation work, but it's a really important one. And I think that when I think about the imminent sort of challenges that we're heading towards, or that that we're not even close to seeing the worst of, I think that at least in our Federation, and especially working with partners and non-affiliated unions and community-based partners, I really think it takes an added effort, especially when everyone's working remotely. It takes added intentionality around staying connected. And while we can't always stay out of internal squabbles, we can't always avoid major blowups, even inside the House of Labor. I have been really heartened over the last year, especially with the sort of the spirit of solidarity that, really it's hard to describe unless you were to come visit one of our board meetings, because, while we have healthy debate, no question, I really have been continually impressed by both public and private sector unions really sort of working together under one umbrella to find common ground, and to sort of know that we're going to have fights elsewhere, but to really work on that shared agenda. I'm not trying to be vague about the question, Sarah. I think it was a really good one, but I do think it really comes down to staying connected, and that communication, and it's not just me, but I think myself and the State Federation's team really being that bridge between unions is a really important value that we bring to the organized labor and progressive community movements. But I think we've got a great team, even if we've got a smaller team that is really well suited with those relationships to do it. So I hope that kind of answers the question, but it really is sort of on my mind every day, thinking about how we can kind of keep folks, pulling in one direction. And again, it doesn't come without its challenges, but it's absolutely kind of, I think, job one in a lot of ways of a state federation like ours.
Right. Thanks, Graham. And I can say something that you can't say. And this is really kind of in the spirit of Eric's question, which is, Eric, you were talking earlier about how do we create bolder, kind of more aggressive responses, more muscular, sort of visionary responses to the austerity agenda that we're, hearing out of Salem, hearing out of Washington, really that's dominating the conversation. And I think about your union, AFSCME Council 75. That's a place where, we've seen in other moments in the labor movement, in the recent history of the labor movement, where a lot of what has pulled the labor movement in one direction or another has been kind of unions like yours and others finding kind of a coalition of the willing, like a group of other unions that agree on a set of action and trying to like pull the rest of the labor movement along with them. That's pretty much the way that our movement advances. So certainly, I hear your call to Graham. I also think, I know you, and I know that you're out there organizing inside of Council 75 to push the council to be more outspoken and more aggressive. And I certainly hope that Council 75 and other public sector unions in the state can kind of form that block that can really try and push the rest of us to come along with you on more aggressive proposals. I see we have a hand up from Rosa. Rosa, I'm going to hold you for one more second because I didn't want to ignore Jordana's question. Jordana, you started at the very beginning of the session asking, Graham, you mentioned in your comments about, everything that's happened since George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis and just the unprecedented uprising for racial justice that we've seen around across Oregon. I live here in Portland. The number of protests that I've been a part of, that I've seen, I can't keep up on. I just got my AARP magazine in the mail today. I get excused from at least a couple of the nights of street demonstrations, but it's really amazing. And Jordana is asking, what is organized labor doing to abate police violence against people of color and protect the right for peaceful demonstrations, the right to protest? So I wanted to give you the floor for talking about how the AFL has been responding to the Floyd murder and to the movement for Black Lives and what we can all be doing as unionists to stand up for these values.
Yeah, really important question. I appreciate that. I think in the wake of the George Floyd murder in particular, I think it really, reminded, I think, me and I think a lot of folks in the labor movement just how, not that we've not been doing important racial justice work and tackling disproportionate impacts and thinking about how to dismantle racism inside our organizations, but we haven't been doing it with enough earnestness. And we haven't been doing it with enough urgency. And that was a really important reminder for me, and I know a number of leaders in the Federation, in Oregon's movement. And so, we issued a strong statement as a Federation I was proud of, but that, like I said in my comments, isn't enough, of course. I was heartened to see actually unions that otherwise have not engaged or spoken up on matters like racial justice or police brutality. I was really heartened to see that actually, and I'd like to think that to Mark's point about a bully pulpit, if we had any impact in kind of helping folks see the importance of engaging, I'm proud of that, but I don't want to take full credit for it by any means. And then, more importantly, I think for our organization, again, we're not the only place, of course, that these conversations are happening in the labor movement, but about 9 days after George Floyd was murdered, the Oregon AFL-CIO board met. And we had a board, we only meet quarterly, unlike individual unions that often meet more regularly. And so I was committed to making sure that board meeting was truly focused on, in a really meaningful, unprecedented way, on racial justice. And so our board, some folks that are on the line were part of that conversation. Our board, our general board that is made up of about 50 different union leaders across the state, across sectors, met, and rather than just sort of wordsmithing a stronger statement or thinking about the right thing to put out there on social media, that board meeting was really impressive in my mind, where affiliate leaders from all sectors, some of which had never prioritized internally racial justice, some who were far advanced in the work, came together and agreed to a set of action steps that really looked at the internal work that the Oregon AFL-CIO, and ideally by extension, a number of our affiliates can tackle. And that included doing our own homework first, right? Not sort of being an externally sort of focused organization until we've done some of that important internal work. And I'm really proud of what that's led to. We're in the process of really unpacking that and setting those pieces in motion. Our board meets again in a few weeks to kind of talk about an update. Again, none of it I feel satisfied with. None of it I feel like is fully enough. But as it relates to the things that we can control as a federation and the work that we can do inside the House of Labor to truly get our own shit in order, frankly, before we sort of really sort of go out and beat our chest about being, self-determined allies in a space that we really have a lot of work to do internally first. I'm proud of that. I'm also proud of the broader labor movement's willingness to really take the lead of Black-led organizations and Black leaders in this moment. I think that's an often underappreciated and overlooked dynamic that's really hard for labor to do. Frankly, we're ready, we're doers. We get out, we want to, if something's not going to get done or getting done in the way that we think it should get done, we take it over. But I've not seen that actually. I've seen the inverse of that in this moment. And I've been really impressed by that, whether it's supporting the work that United Oregon's doing, Casey Jama, his leadership, whether it's the work that Urban League of Portland's doing and Nikeng's leadership. Lamar Wise is doing incredible work wearing sort of a couple different hats where he works at AFSCME, but also really a leader in the Black Lives Matter movement. And I've been really impressed by our ability as a movement to really support those folks and take their lead and frankly, be humble enough to sort of wait to hear what they need. So when it came to policy objectives for the early short session that led to some of the police reform conversations, I was really proud that a lot of labor organizations, including our state federation, signed on to the request of those Black leaders. And that's a big deal. That's putting our power where it matters. And I'm really proud of that. Again, nothing feels fully sufficient or satisfactory, but I'm proud of that difference that I think is really unique to this moment.
Right, and I will say, at least for me, I'm not a longtime Oregonian. I've been here 2 years now, this month, but it's been great as somebody who's participated in a lot of the actions and activities in town in Portland to see kind of self-organized labor contingents and the Black Lives Matter marches. Labor gatherings coming through now, sort of dealing with the federal police presence, and that's to me kind of the vision the labor movement should have, right? We show up, we stand up for our solidarity means something to us. It's more than just words, as you say. There are some tough questions that come up with that. We had this discussion in our last webinar last week, and one of the questions in the chat that I don't know if you want to tackle, you can pass on if you want, but we were discussing police unions and the way to navigate the police union issue. Bill Fletcher, who was one of our panelists last week, said, he certainly doesn't believe, he thinks protecting collective bargaining rights for workers is important. Police should have unions, but maybe one of the problems we run into is that they often fall within other organizations, like the questioner, Eric, was asking this question, is a member of AFSCME, where they represent law enforcement, corrections, and others. How do you see this issue playing out in the Oregon labor movement? And is there a way that we can, navigate it both forcefully, but also intentionally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I'm not afraid to take it. I think I'll just say initially, and I think this probably goes without saying, I hope it goes without saying to listeners on the line today, every worker, we will always believe that every worker deserves the right to collectively bargain for a better life. But I'll also say, I think it's a really important caveat now in this moment. No union contract should ever be used as a shield for misconduct or illegal behavior. And so I think I grabbed that actually from Lee Saunders. Lee Saunders, the president of AFSCME, actually said that in a really powerful statement, where he as a national union leader is really struggling with the same thing that a number of national union leaders are dealing with around these amalgamated unions that represent lots of different types of workers, including law enforcement workers, and in some cases, even police departments. So I'll just say a couple additional things. I'm proud of Oregon's union movement for taking a very thoughtful approach about how to support the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of the stuff I had mentioned earlier, so I won't repeat. But I'll just say a couple things about internally, what that looks like for us, right? We are a part of the national umbrella organization of the AFL-CIO, of which 13 different unions represent law enforcement workers. 13. It's not just the IUPA that gets all the attention. 13 different unions represent law enforcement workers, and so one of the things that I've been somewhat impressed by the National AFL-CIO is their intentionality around policing practices and having discussions among those 13 unions, including IUPA, to come to some agreement around a code of excellence inside unions that represent law enforcement workers. Now, I don't know what the end game there is. I don't know what that leads to. I'm not going to sort of gloss over the fact that it may not lead to much. But I do think that was an important moment that the National AFL, or an important action that the National AFL-CIO took in the aftermath when those early calls for IUPA disaffiliation was put out. But I also got to say, and the last thing I'll say about this, I'm open to the discussion back and forth, but and I just got an email about this actually today in an Oregon context. But I know for a fact, we all know, and we can agree as trade unionists, that anything that folks that want to destroy public sector unions, anything they can do, anything they can capitalize on, anything they can stoke dissension about, anything they can divide around, they're going to do it. And unfortunately, what we're seeing in some of these conversations is an effort by those that truly want to destroy all of us that represent public sector workers, or are public sector workers, destroy our ability to have a union altogether. They're using this current opportunistic moment to then stoke a lot of that discord. That's not to say that that's happening everywhere, but I know for a fact that there was a legislative concept that I just saw in Oregon that embodies exactly what I'm saying in preparation for future legislative sessions. So again, it's not to by any means excuse the misconduct that is so egregious. And like I said earlier, I will never, I think we can all agree that no union contract should never be used as a shield, like it unfortunately has been for too many years for law enforcement officers and rank and file police officers in particular. But I am ever mindful of that far right anti-union strategy that is using moments like this to also destroy all public sector unions.
Yeah, I've had some, I've surprised some of my friends who have been very eager to engage in a discussion about Portland Police Association's contract and just raising the risks, right? I mean, this could open the door to PECPA and a lot of the just cause protections that we all need and deserve. So, as you say, balancing that, standing up for what's right, but also making sure that we are protecting just cause. Let
me just say one more thing about the balance. So the last thing I'll say is that that on the other side of that coin, around standing up for what's right in this moment, I was also really proud that the Oregon AFL-CIO and a number of unions, many of which are on the call tonight, actually stood up as statewide organizations and backed the play and the demands of those Black leaders that I referenced earlier that had a set of policy demands as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And that included actually some kind of groundbreaking arbitration policy language around the role of arbitrators with especially issues of the use of force. So I think that that was one example where the labor movement, even though we will always defend collective bargaining, was also willing to think a little bit more critically about this moment and what's needed. So.
Great, and I don't want to speak for you, and I want to make sure we get to Rosa, who's been on the line waiting to speak for a minute. But I did want to say Stella brought up some of the issues of diversity of tactics in terms of some of the property destruction and other stuff that we've seen. I can say for myself, I've been in this movement 25 years. I've always believed, just as we've seen in every piece of American history when we've made big breakthroughs, nonviolent mass civil disobedience has been our weapon, our strongest weapon. And I think that that's what's going to change, policing practices in America. That's what's going to actually enforce our rights. So I just didn't want to ignore your comment, Stella, but I wanted to chime in on that from my end.
You want me to comment on that?
If you'd like.
We said it in our statement on May 25th, on May, I think the last day of May, I'm not sure which day, but in our statement around the George Floyd murder, that we're also as a movement, I think, unwilling to to sort of distract from the movement for Black Lives by sort of focusing on property damage. Again, that's not to excuse violence, but I got to tell you, if I'm thinking about prioritization as a labor leader and someone who believes in social justice and is a progressive thinker, I'm going to have a little bit more tolerance for property destruction if it means fewer Black men and women being killed by law enforcement officers.
Amen. Rosa, I applaud your patience. I apologize for our long-windedness, or at least my long-windedness. Graham's very succinct. Let me open the floor for you and unmute you. Rosa, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, and all of this discussion has been so important, and I don't want to diminish it at all, but I heard something. I mean, there's nothing that Trump says that's not disturbing. I'm with CWA 7901, and I'm also a member of SEIU 503, so I'm kind of a dual member, but my AFL affiliation is through CWA. Mm-hmm. But this morning, Trump, who's been fighting mail-in ballots, as we know, I know we're safe here in Oregon and Washington and probably some other states, but quite interestingly, he is allowing Florida to do all mail-in ballots, but not, and is suing Nevada for doing mail-in ballots. So, and this may be more of a question on the international level, but I was just wondering what, if there's any plan by labor to stop this ridiculous thing that, one more thing that Trump's trying to do to suppress the vote.
Absolutely. Really important question. I think that our federal advocacy, as you mentioned, is, preaching to the choir with at least our Senate, colleagues, Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley being strong supporters of the HEROES Act that unfortunately Senate Republicans have now sat on their hands for 2 months, more than 2 months. I think May, when was it passed? At least 2 months, over 2 months now. And so I believe that the HEROES Act also had an expansion of vote by mail in it, as well as support for the U.S. Postal Service. So I think it is absolutely part of the national labor movement strategy to expand the ability for more workers to have access to vote by mail. I couldn't agree with you more, sister, around that being something that we in Oregon take for granted, and something that other workers and voters in other states must have access to. It is just a crazy thing to observe every single day, though, the things that person in the White House, continues to say as it relates to voting access, as it relates to just about anything. So I saw what you're referring to today, and I just sort of, I just shook my head yet again. So absolutely on the radar of the national labor movement. I know for a fact the AFL-CIO is on board with that advocacy. I know that CWA is as well. I know SEIU is, everyone, I think, in the labor movement is singing with one voice around the need to expand vote by mail.
Right, and it's really interesting. It raises, within the state of Oregon, it really raises the profile of the race for Secretary of State, because I was at a union meeting with Shemia Fagan, candidate for Secretary of State, and I'd never heard, the Secretary of State office never seemed more relevant to me than it did in that moment. So I wondered if you wanted to use that as a chance to talk a little bit about November. Very good time for our movement, Graham, and tell us a little bit about what our priorities are at the state level, or what the AFL's priorities are at the state level, and what we can do to help advance those, to advance that agenda that you've been talking about.
Absolutely. It's unfortunately a little hard to think about a November election when we have multiple COVID-related special sessions in front of us, but it obviously is on our mind. It's something we're preparing for. I'll just say, along with others on the line I see, we were proud to have played a role in getting Shemia Fagan, now Democratic, nominee for Secretary of State, through the primary just by a couple thousand votes. And if that doesn't showcase, I think, the value of field mobilizing door-to-door, or the replacement for door-to-door in this case, phones, texts, everything in a COVID reality. If that doesn't showcase the value of that work when those late returns were moving towards Shemia, I really don't know what does. So I was really proud to have had a team that really implemented a really robust field program that had actually more positive IDs for Shemia than Shemia won by. Again, we were doing that work despite those challenges. And again, I know a lot of folks had a significant role in that win. So again, that win in November is critical. We're also still ever mindful of the need to fulfill the goals that we started around accountability for the disappointments from the 2019 legislative session, especially around PERS and some other building trades and UFCW priorities. And so that feels like ages ago. But we're, I think, on track to actually help to improve the cultures within both of our Democratic caucuses, both in the House and the Senate, with some of the primary wins that we had. For the first time, all seven of our priority races that we targeted in the primary were either a woman or a person of color, and 4 or 5 of them were either current union members or former union members or staff. And so when I think about the shift in culture to be more pro-worker and not just take labor for granted, unfortunately that happens even in states with Democratic supermajorities. I'm really heartened by that potential. And so when we think about bringing those folks through the general election into the Democratic caucuses in both the House and the Senate, I'm really excited about what we can do to, again, shift that culture towards a more pro-worker, worker-centered culture, and especially as we think about a recovery from COVID, where we're going to need all hands on deck to keep workers at the center of all of these discussions, whether it's public sector workers and austerity fights or private sector workers and efforts to undermine union rights or collective bargaining, or just sort of, broader tactics that are a little bit more subtle, but still come across as anti-union. So I think all of those are really important comments I'd make about 2020. I think Oregonians have a proud tradition, of course, of showing up when it's important. And the labor movement, I would say, has an even more proud tradition of showing up when it's important in Oregon. And I expect that to play out in the coming months, despite the challenges and having to do it all remotely.
Great. You mentioned the fact that we've got a bunch of COVID special sessions coming up, and I wondered if you saw any glimmers of hope in terms of turning of the tide of kind of the austerity consensus, the idea that, well, it's just going to be tough times. Sorry, in Salem. Are there some things that maybe those of us who aren't quite as inside or are not as seasoned with Salem politics as you are wouldn't notice or haven't necessarily seen? Anything that you can point to that we're making a dent? I'm just curious because if not, we do know what it takes to move the needle. We've seen that in the last 3 months. So
you might pick it up with my my nonverbal facial expressions. Unfortunately, I'm having a hard time thinking of like a positive spin on that answer. I think that we do have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do in the coming weeks, special session, and then whatever subsequent budget conversations happen. And so again, we'll, as a federation of a lot of different diverse voices, we always will take the lead of our public sector partners and affiliates, but and they may be able to answer more specifically about that dynamic, but we do, I'll just say, have a lot of work to do to sort of shift that narrative.
Right. We got a comment in the Q&A box from Eric Feely. Thank you, Eric. Just raising for Oregonians who aren't necessarily following politics in other parts of the country, there does feel like there's some shifting momentum in a lot of places. Before I lived here, I used to live in New York. I lived there for 15 years, and I can tell you machine politics is alive and well in New York State. I never thought I would see the day that we would actually have a credible challenge to the New York City, New York State Democratic Party machine. And we've seen some very exciting state level and even congressional races like Jamal Bowman, who just won his race in the 16th district in New York, and Cori Bush in Missouri. There's a lot of examples where upstarts, progressives are really saying, people want bold solutions. I'm going to give them bold solutions, and they're winning. So I'm curious, you mentioned a couple of, progress we're making with our own candidates and endorsements. What can we do to kind of accelerate that shift in the Oregon landscape, Graham? Anything that rank and file folks can do? Hint, hint, Union School.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, I mean, I'm also I see your question, Eric, and I'm also really heartened and excited about those victories, because I think it really embodies what we in the labor movement, especially now, given rampant economic inequality, the fact that Jeff Bezos is on track to be a trillionaire in 6 years, the fact that the billionaire class has made 20% profit during the pandemic, their wealth has increased by 20%. So there's no question that folks are fed up and they're looking for folks that are fighting for them. And so when they see things like these examples of primary victories, that they come across like they're fighting for them, that they're willing to stand up, take tough votes, really push back on the status quo, that's music to my ears, and our ears, I think, in the labor movement. And so, coming out of that really rough 2019 legislative session, there was a lot of talk about what that Oregon version of accountability might look like. And while we didn't necessarily have any direct head-to-head incumbent challenges, we have made progress and inroads with being much more thoughtful and intentional about our candidate recruitment. And that's not just the labor movement. That's with our community-based partners, especially partners that work with communities of color. And so the diverse slate of folks that are coming in through this primary in general is really exciting. And I expect to build on that. I mean, whether we're talking about local government offices, the example in Lane County when progressives and the union movement took over that county commission after workers were pushed out on strike. That kind of stuff is what I want, what I'm really interested in and invested in, and seeding in regions and in communities around the state, in addition to keeping our eye on opportunities at the state legislative level. So absolutely.
Well, we've got one more question, and then I'm going to let you wrap up and let folks get to dinner. From our very own Jen Smith. Jen, I think is riffing off something that you were talking about before about, standing up for our values and principles. But we know that a lot of the things that are happening in the world right now that we're talking about, whether it be about taxing the rich or about standing up for, standing with the movement for Black lives, can sometimes be, divisive inside the movement. How do we find commonalities and build some bridges with particularly our conservative union siblings? So I wondered if you could just speak a bit to that, and then I'll let you also close out. And if anybody else wants to get their last shot in, please raise your hand or drop your question in the chat.
That's a good question. I mean, I think it also speaks to the role and the importance of a federation like ours, right, to be able to keep those ties. And, it ends up being incumbent on the AFL-CIO team to sort of bridge those divides, at least within our house of the labor movement. And so, not always easy. But I will say, I got to tell you, 5 years ago, the Oregon AFL-CIO, and I think I saw Barbara Bird on the line, 5 or 6 years ago, we, at the Oregon AFL-CIO, with Barbara and Tom's leadership, started to think about and tackle racial justice internally. And I remember some really rough conversations with our board, frankly, with our executive committee, some of our largest affiliates and the leaders within them. And rough in the sense that folks couldn't, especially as white male leaders, couldn't quite sort of dissect, race and class, and they grew up and struggled and couldn't understand why that wasn't an important sort of lived experience as well, right, in talking about racial justice. And now I think things are different. I see folks that otherwise 5 or 6 years ago would have, some have retired, but for those that are still around, I've seen a real shift in folks' consciousness and sensitivity and willingness to shut the hell up, to listen and learn a little bit more. I've seen that shift just in the last couple of years. And I think that now that, you sort of are a couple months from the George Floyd murder, and we had a board meeting conversation in June, I was really impressed that we actually had, it was virtual, right? It was our first ever in the history of the Oregon AFL-CIO virtual board meeting. And we had a discussion with 55 leaders about racial justice and the George Floyd murder and action steps. And it was an incredibly positive conversation. And so I think that shift comes with time, it comes with consciousness, it comes with us sort of giving learning and education opportunities to our affiliates as well. So again, we haven't figured it all out. I'm not going to sort of lead you to believe that, but I do think that's some, at least some positive, sort of progress that I've seen in recent years.
Yeah, and I will add, I've been very impressed with the unlikely places that we've seen folks stepping up and really engaging in the tough conversations internally, not in any way to try and drive people out of the room, but not shy away from the issues that people might feel uncomfortable with, whether it's the building trades hosting Black Lives Matter rallies, and seeing the DCTU unions here in Portland tackle this and put out a really strong statement about the Floyd killing and the need to stand up for Black lives. It's been exciting and inspiring, and I think it's a real watershed moment for the union movement. And I think that as you're saying, the progress that's been made has been through struggle. I also think a lot of it has been through folks on this call who've been at the grassroots pushing and really holding us to the standard that we should be holding everybody to hold our movement to. So we're right on 6 o'clock. I want to let you wrap up and thank everybody for being here. And I'm also going to post a link to our future workshops in the chat. Please sign up if you haven't for our rest of our summer series. Graham.
Great. I'll just say one quick thing about that last point you made, that at the same time, there's risks about alienating members that are maybe more conservative or leaders that are maybe more conservative in their thinking. There's also the exact opposite risk, because we have a progressive labor movement in Oregon, by and large, that truly, I think, is increasingly so. And I think that gives me a lot of hope about where we're heading. So yeah, I don't have a lot to say to wrap up other than just really appreciate LERC and the work that you do. I'm really inspired by the folks that are, again, willing to be and struggling with this reality, but still being interested in connecting. These spaces are so important, and anything that I at the State Fed or we can do to support LERC or others on the call that is really a follow-up to some of these really important conversations that are so meaty. I'd be more than happy to have follow-up conversations, but I'm inspired every day by the leadership in Oregon, and I'm also unsatisfied every day by the challenges and the work that needs to be done, and I'm impatient about the progress that we're able to make. And so I think, like many on the call I know, and like trade unionists at large, really that drives us. And I'm so impressed and inspired by the role of organized labor in Oregon in this moment, and what we're if there's a worker that's struggling out there in a low-wage industry that's exposed to the public and potentially has a family member that's immunocompromised, if they look around, they don't have to look very hard to see the labor movement out front fighting for them, even if they're not a union member. And that gives me a lot of hope and confidence in our ability to make make these changes needed in the coming months.
Right. And again, as you say, preaching to the choir, I know many of you on this call are very familiar with LERC, have been to many of our programs. But I just wanted to make a plug. If there's anything that we can do at the Labor Center to help you, anything from hosting, your Zoom meetings and running the tech so you can focus on the meat of your meeting, to doing any of the kinds of trainings that we traditionally do. We're moving almost all of them virtually. So whether it's how to bargain in Zoom, or how to build a racial justice education program, or do regular steward training in the virtual world, definitely be in touch. I put my email in the chat. Graham, again, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank all of you in the audience, and we will see you again very soon. Please sign up for our August series. We've got a lot more coming, including a whole dedicated session to the next budget, the biennium, and what's going on in Salem with the budget. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.